Again, welcome everyone. I would like to welcome you all to our first webinar, and just a brief introduction about myself. I'm the director of METU Center for Climate Change and Sustainable Development, as well as I'm the director of Institute of Marine Sciences, and I serve as advisor to METU's Rector on sustainability and climate. And today I'm very happy and excited to be hosting you today. This is our first planned series of 5 webinars, pre-COP. So these are our pre-COP events. So as you know, COP31 will be held in Turkey, in Antalya in November. And these webinars are part of METU Climate Talks that will continue also once the COP ends. So it's very exciting to start today, and we are very lucky to have outstanding panelists today, each of whom are leading voices in their respective areas. And I would like to thank to all our panelists who made the time today, and they're here to share their expertise with us. Just one panelist, Murat Türkeş, our colleague, had to go through a urgent operation surgery yesterday, so he's not with us. Just a brief introduction, then I will introduce our panelists. So as you know, climate change is one of the most crucial, most vital challenge of our times and our planet. And the primary outcome of COP was that the 1.5 degree target, it was set in 2015 and also reflected in the Paris Agreement. But at the moment, we are witnessing that we are already exceeding this target, and this track continues. And at the moment, we foresee that by the end of the century, we may exceed 3 degrees of average temperatures. So on top of this, we are experiencing the recent heat waves in Europe and the Mediterranean. So the issue is closer to us, closer to home now. And in combination with the superimposed El Nino now, that is expected to get to intensify later this year, this will bring new heat waves, droughts, and possibly other crises with it, like wildfires. So this El Nino may be part of the natural cycle. It can be an irregular event, but unless we take immediate and radical action, all these will become regular realities together with climate change. So these are becoming the new normal, but the economic and social cost of this new normal will be immense. So the upcoming COP, therefore, is yet another crucial juncture for us to try to stop or at least to slow down the climate crisis. The administration of COP31 announced that this will be a COP focused on implementation. The idea is to convince all the nations to start acting for real, and we believe that science-based policy is essential if we will find a way out of this conundrum. And the academia needs to contribute. So that's what we are trying to do as the center. So the challenge is quite big. So we need multiple solutions and widespread action. Again, as I said, we have distinguished panelists today, and I would like to introduce them to you before we move on to our panel. So I will proceed alphabetically here. Our first panelist today is Rose Heather Armour. Rose specializes on multi-stakeholder partnership and climate education. She serves as the director of the International Universities Climate Alliance, where she coordinates global higher education networks to advance climate research and action. Her background includes serving as head of sustainability at the American University of Sharjah and managing transboundary climate and water projects for the USAID in Central Asia. During COP28, she was seconded as the head of climate education, directing efforts to institutionalize academic and youth partnership within official summit framework. So it's really a pleasure to have you here, Rose, and thanks for making time. And our second speaker is Thomas Anker Christensen. Ambassador Christensen is a career diplomat specializing in high-level climate negotiations and energy policy. He currently serves as cabinet expert and senior advisor to Dan Jorgensen, the European Union Commissioner for Energy and Housing. And before this role, he was the climate ambassador for Denmark, where he led national climate diplomacy initiatives and worked closely with international partners to drive green transition strategies. His career bridges multilateral diplomatic frameworks and roles at the United Nations with practical sector-specific implementation in energy and infrastructure, as well as posting as ambassador of Denmark to Egypt and Iran. Welcome, Mr. Ambassador. It's a great pleasure to have you here. And our third speaker is Dr. Joanna Deplec. Joanna is a leading academic authority on international climate change negotiations. She's a research fellow at the University of Cambridge, affiliated with both the Center for Environment, Energy and Natural Resource Governance and the Center for Science and Policy, a founding member of Cambridge Zero Policy Forum and a senior member of the editorial team of the Climate Policy Journal. She previously served as a lecturer at Cambridge Department of Politics and International Studies. Her expertise is grounded in practical expertise, as they formerly served as a staff member and then consultant for the UN Climate Change Secretariat. Her research tracks the evolution of the UNFCCC process and the climate regime. Thanks again, Joanna, for being here for us. I mean, our speakers are really very valuable and amazing curriculums. So even summarizing their expertise was not easy. So we are really honored to have them all here today with us. And just a little bit about the format today. We have 3 panelists, and we will start with 3 rounds of questions. So I will ask after each question to the speakers. We will have 3 minutes to answer each question. And then we will have a flash round of answers to a common question, which should be quick enough. So if our speakers stay within the 3-minute rule, we may have time for an extra round, and we will conclude with the brief Q&A sessions. So our viewers can type in their questions in the chat, and I will then choose the most relevant ones. And sometimes I may merge a few questions and then pose them to the speaker. So let's get started with our panel. And I would like to start with Joanna Deplec, who has been part of the COP process and has been monitoring climate negotiations as a scholar for many years. And Joanna, based on your academic and professional affinity with COP processes, I would like to open our discussion with somewhat provocative question, as we are headed for the 31st conference of the parties, but we are still witnessing an intensifying climate crisis. Do you think that the past 30 COPs did not meet the expectations in their effort to combat climate change? Please, the floor is yours, Joanna.
Thank you very much, and let me start by thanking you for inviting me to this important gathering. For me, this really marks the countdown towards COP31. So thank you very much for that. I do think it's interesting how widespread the view seems to be that these 34 years of intergovernmental efforts on climate change have been a failure or a waste of time. I often hear that. And certainly I would not subscribe to that view at all. Yes, disappointing. Yes, not met expectations, but failure certainly not. And I think it's always important to bear in mind that we would be in a much worse situation if it were not for the climate change regime and negotiations at all. So if I could just use up maybe 2 of my minutes just quickly, running through what I think have been the achievements. We do have 3 climate change treaties, and these have set global norms to which every country subscribes, at least on paper. The convention committed countries to preventing dangerous climate change, and that has since been made more precise through the, as you mentioned, the 2-degree and the 1.5-degree target. Plus, let's not forget, in effect, net zero in the Paris Agreement themselves. And these provide really important benchmarks against which we can then measure, in a sense, performance, and also for non-governmental organizations to set their own goals. That's really important. As we all know, we have a global framework for action. We have the NDCs, and these built on other forms of frameworks that have evolved over time, for example, including the Kyoto Protocol legally binding targets for developed countries, pledges under the Copenhagen Accord. So there has been this kind of, progression in the framework for country action. Then I think there is a danger in always looking at COPs, and in doing so, we kind of forget the lower profile work programs, institutions that work. I hope you can still hear me. Yeah. So there's been, for example, transparency, reporting and review. Before the negotiations started, virtually no country knew what its emissions were. And now we have these systems whereby we have very good methodologies for all countries to estimate their emissions and to report on what they're doing. These things should not be underestimated. There is help for developing countries, finance, technology transfer, capacity building. Okay, there's not enough. Yeah, there will never be enough, but there's much more than there would have been without the regime. And then there's other points that I could refer to, but I would say this huge awareness raising, and again, that should not be underestimated. Right at the beginning, participation in the COPs was quite low from civil society, and now it's huge. There is virtually no organization, no business, no section of civil society that doesn't know about climate change these days. That's really important. And all these things have impacted on the real world. Yeah, there has been implementation of these treaties. There has been change on the ground because of them. Climate change laws, policies, strategies, and we see how these have jumped with each treaty that's been adopted. There's been academic research done on this. It is linked to the treaties themselves. We see how even China, which was so reluctant at first, it's now become a huge green leader. Even the United States, we kind of forget now, but under Biden, there was an extremely extensive climate change law that was put together. As we all know, renewable energy costs have fallen sharply, spreading throughout the world. And let's face it, yes, emissions are going up, but they are going up more slowly. And yeah, they'll go more slowly, and many scientists think they're about to peak. And with each treaty, each step, the projected emissions by organizations such as Climate Action Tracker, they have gone down as well. Right. Now, don't get me wrong. I am not saying that all this is enough. That's the last thing I'm saying. If we spoke to the architects of the convention in 92, they would never have thought that we would only have got this far 30 and a bit years later. And why? I mean, that will be the subject of a whole other webinar. I mean, climate change is inherently difficult, huge inertia in our economic and social systems, vested interests, psychology, human psychology, which I think is very important. Recently a pivot towards right-wing governments, all this. And I think there certainly was a bit of naivety at the beginning of the regime. I think people like myself maybe underestimated how hard this would all be. So I'll leave it at that, but I guess my message is not a failure. Think where we would have been without the regime, but obviously not enough. So they may be very obvious points, but I hope it's useful sometimes to recall those as we go forwards. Thank you.
Great. Thanks a lot. Actually, your response is motivating towards the next COP. Especially, it impressed me what you said with respect to the civil society, that their interest really grew. You have a very positive point about that. So thanks for this answer. That in a way it builds hope. So I would like to move to Ambassador Thomas Christensen, and I would like to, dear Ambassador, I would like to pose you a question on how you would position EU in the global trends around climate change. The EU has been indeed the pioneer in terms of institutionalizing climate change mitigations and adaptation and its policymaking process. So based on your previous and current roles, what do you think EU's top achievement has been in this area, and where do you see the room for improvement? And what can be done to disseminate EU's example around the globe?
Thank you, Professor, for also inviting me to join you. And I join Joanna and also saluting you and the Turkish presidency, incoming presidency, for taking on this role. And every year we need to find a new volunteer to drive the process forward, and the Turkish leadership is very much welcome. Maybe also continuing in the same line of thinking as Joanna, when we started out with laying out the climate convention back in Rio in 1992, the OECD countries were at the lion's share of global emissions, far more than 50% of global emissions. And the combined OECD emissions today are less than China's total emissions. So over the last 30, 35 years, we've seen a major shift in both emissions and the global economy that reflects that. And while the European economy has still continued to grow, our emissions have they peaked in the mid 2000s and have started to decline since then, and have gone down by more than a third. And we are now in a situation where, for example, almost half of our electricity is generated from renewable energy, and we can see the end of coal-fired power plants in the European Union in the next decade or 10, 15 years. So there has been a major shift in the balance of emissions. In Europe, we have done that primarily through regulation, and the European Commission, where I work now, is put forward after the Paris Agreement its Green Deal and its NDC, with a target of reducing emissions by 55% in 2030. So we're in the middle of that now, and we did adopt from 2020 to 2024 a whole range of legislation and regulation in all sectors that combined with our emissions trading system, regulate and is set on bringing down emissions. And grosso modo, we are on track to achieving the 55% reduction. We are currently targeted towards 54, but we are within the range where 55 is achievable. And we have just last year adopted the next target all the way out to 2040 with a 90% emissions target. So the EU basically achieves its reductions in emissions through regulation and legislation. And you can argue that that takes a long time for the legislation then actually to have impact. But we can see that we are now in a situation where we install somewhere between 80 and 100 gigawatts of renewable energy every year. And we've done that every year for the past years. So now with the Hormuz energy crisis in Europe, we don't really have a supply crisis, we have a price crisis. But 4 years ago, when Russia invaded Ukraine, we also had a supply crisis, and we were not seeing that in the same way now. So the impact of the installation of renewable energy, of bringing down emissions, can be felt in the European economy. We also saw this spring during the crisis a tick up in the electric vehicles, and European consumers are now, in vast majorities, buying electric vehicles more than combustion engine cars. And so sector by sector, we can see that legislation that was adopted 5 years ago starts to have a huge impact. Our focus now, and maybe let me end there now, has that now also shifted while we maintain our decarbonization focus. We're shifting to how to use that to build energy security and to increase European competitiveness. Because there are some critics who say that our energy prices are too high, European companies are losing out, and we need to be able to compete with other countries around the world. So that is our focus now, maintaining our decarbonization focus, but building competitiveness and security, and adopting our innovation and technologies so that they're also economic and affordable. And it's not for me to advise other countries on what to do, but we very much welcome the dialogue with others, also in the context of COP, of the pathways, of how we implement, what are the good examples, what are regulations that work in terms of setting the framework for emissions reductions. And we very much welcome the COP being a space for that conversation on mitigation pathways.
Thank you, Ambassador Christensen. It's definitely inspiring to see the success of EU, and as you say, there's a lot to learn from this success, and so this will be picked up by other countries around the globe as well in the future. So this is definitely a very positive aspect. And I would like to proceed with Rose Armour, who has been an active actor to promote the integration of universities and academia into efforts addressing the climate change. And also being a university center, we are looking forward to hearing her ideas as well. So Rose, based on your experience within and outside the COPs, what do you think the main barriers preventing scientific and academic knowledge from being integrated into decision-making, planning, and policy development? And how can the presidencies, the COP presidencies, overcome these barriers, move beyond treating knowledge institutions and universities as observers, and include them as core partners?
Yes, thank you so much, and thank you for inviting me to be a part of this webinar. This is very exciting. So I think one of the main challenges of COP events is that no presidency has ever organized a COP before, and so they're always starting from square one. It's like rebuilding a plane every year that you're flying it, and so it's a real challenge to make sure that all of the actors are meaningfully engaged. I think one of the positive ways to overcome the barriers are in having a dedicated space. We've advocated for this for the last 4 COPs, is having a dedicated space in the Blue Zone for higher education is a first step to set the tone to really demonstrating that partnership role and ensuring that higher education has a voice in COP events. And this is, and that is also, with that said, it's also important that we're ensuring that academic knowledge is being integrated, as you said, into decision-making, planning, and policy development. And this should be happening throughout the UNFCCC process. I think we need to not look just at a COP as an opportunity for this. So higher education definitely has some work to do here. And we need to make sure that researchers are engaged in the IPCC process. but not only as authors, but there's also opportunities as reviewers, which does not require the nomination. So to become an author for the IPCC, your national negotiation team, so your government has to nominate you to be a part of that process. And so that is a very limited opportunity. But the review process, you just have to have expertise in the different areas. So this is something that many more people can be involved in and can be engaged with. And then you start to learn about the process and you build more expertise. I think we should also be making sure that our researchers in higher education are engaged in other processes throughout the UNFCCC process. There's the research and systematic observation process, which is really an opportunity for researchers to do more I wouldn't say rapid assessment, but is faster assessment and review of data and providing data to the negotiations teams than the IPCC reports are, which take a much longer period of time. So this is another area that higher education we should really be trying to get our academics involved in, and also just with the constitutional bodies. There's always opportunity to provide that, but I think it takes a lot of work and it takes an understanding of the process, and you need to have that understanding to do that. And I think that one of the things that many higher education institutions get stuck on is to be an observer. And I think while it's valuable to be an observer, it's not necessary for everyone to be an observer. You can get to COP by working with other observer organizations, with your negotiations team, with your national team. There's a lot of ways to get there, and it's not necessary that you have that process. It takes a long time. It can take up to 2 years to get your observer status. And so we don't want to hold people back by that. So I think we need to be creative in how we do it. We need to be to continually work towards it, and to make sure that people understand the different ways that they can get involved. So I really think it's a two-way street. It's not always clear how to get involved. So it's really an area where IUCA, the organization that I'm working for, and some other organizations are really continually working to demystify this process and to provide opportunities for higher education researchers to get involved and to be a part of the conversation and provide information for the research.
Thanks a lot, Rose. These are definitely valuable insights for us. Now I would like to go back to Joanna, and again, a question about the dynamics at international climate negotiations. Joanna, do you agree that host countries make bold announcements and participant countries make big promises at COPs, but the gap between collective pledges and real-world implementation remains there? And the global emissions are still too high for us to reach the net zero that you mentioned in the first round. And from what you have witnessed over the years, what can we change to help countries get real work done instead of just making big announcements? And how can we make how can the countries made more accountable regarding their commitments without prompting states to withdraw from the process without scaring them?
Yes, thank you. Well, clearly that's a extremely relevant question right now, given that we're in this implementation phase of the Paris Agreement. But I wouldn't downplay the importance of big announcements, and important pledges, because that's a role that the COP has as a platform for countries, for business CEOs to put on record what their plans are. And once they're put on record in the international community, then they can be held to account to some extent. So I wouldn't underestimate how important these pledges are and announcement. But obviously, we then want them to be implemented. I always tell my students to have a bit of a note of caution regarding this implementation role of the COP, because we have to remember that the COP can only act to a very limited extent on implementation. As Ambassador Christensen said, you might have noticed he said, it's not up to me to tell other countries what to do. Well, That is the same with the COP. Countries are very happy to set global norms. They're okay to negotiate big picture rules and frameworks, but it's not possible for the COP to say, okay, to implement this, you need to pursue this policy, you need to have this domestic strategy. No, that's not okay. They're not going to do that. And for the same reason, the actual accountability or compliance mechanisms are of necessity quite soft. So the Paris Agreement, as we know, does have an implementation compliance committee, but it is really restricted in what it can actually do. So it's worth bearing that in mind. And that's just a feature of the intergovernmental state system, right? That's based on sovereignty, to some extent competition. Countries can just withdraw from the treaty if they're not happy with being named and shamed or anything like that. So that's very important to bear in mind. However, there are, I don't want it to be a counsel of despair. There is much that can be done. I mean, generally speaking, once countries' governments sign up to a particular commitment or target, they like to meet that. They don't like to be exposed as non-compliers. Countries generally don't like that. And I think the whole accountability and transparency system under the regime has an important role to play. I was talking about these reports that countries send in on what they're doing. These are reviewed in different ways. Reports are provided. They're all non-judgmental, non-confrontational. Okay, but the data will be there on whether countries are meeting their commitments or not. There's the global stocktake. And I think the process is going to start at COP31. The global stocktake is really important as a kind of, collective assessment as to where, the world is as a whole, not individual countries, but that makes a big impact. And there, Rose, I really like what you were saying about, academics and other observers inputting. The global stocktake is one which really welcomes input from different civil society, non-governmental organizations, academic institutions. And then I did want to really emphasize the role of the action agenda. By that, I mean the showcasing of what businesses, civil society organizations, local governments, faith groups, gender groups, all these different organizations around the world, what they are actually doing on the ground, because sometimes there's a bit of a mismatch. At the moment, we have this activity on the ground, which is a lot more promising than the governments who are in a bit of a slump at the moment. And this action agenda really shows what can be done. And it also shows, crucially, there is support, among citizens, among voters for action that governments are a bit frightened of taking. And then finally, in a sense, I think the most impact that can be had on implementation is actually domestically and at home. And I know here we're talking about the COP, and obviously that is absolutely fundamental. But if lobbying organizations really want to have an impact right now, I would start by lobbying their domestic decision makers, because you can be sure they are being lobbied by vested interests. They are being lobbied by fossil fuel groups. And I think that's where the influence really starts. Once governments get to COP, their positions will already have been determined. So I think at the moment, it really does start domestically.
Thanks. Thanks a lot. These are really definitely very valid points, Joanna. And I think we have a lot of responsibility on our shoulders as well, as you said, as academicians, civil society, and citizens. And we need to continue demanding commitments towards net zero and keep the pressure on there. Yeah. And I would like to proceed with Ambassador Christensen. And one of the key controversies at COPs has always been the finance, intergovernmental finance to fund the climate transition at global scale, and the balance between the imbalance between North and South is there. So what is your assessment of the performance of these finance mechanisms, and what can be done to improve the North-South climate funding mechanisms?
I think the finance mechanisms have actually delivered what they were meant to deliver in the context of the COP, to the extent that the finance targets that were agreed have also been met. Maybe a bit late. The 100 billion target per year was not met in 2020, but a few years after. But then actually fast overshot the 100 billion. So if you take the average, we might actually see that we more or less have delivered what was promised. But I think it's also obvious as we go further down the road in terms of the global transition, it is clear that the pledges of financing are by no means enough to meet the cost of the transition. And I think the conversation more and more will be that the climate financing will be for the most vulnerable and for those in highest needs, whereas the cost of the transition in emerging economies, the G20 countries plus, is actually being met by their own investments and their own funds. If you take China or India, they receive very little in terms of what is defined as climate finance under the COP mechanism, but they generate very, very massive investments into clean technologies themselves, which is of course extremely positive. And so we are entering into a situation where the pro-climate investments in many countries are also the most profitable investments, and those that, for example, deliver energy at the lowest cost. So in that sense, over the course of the last 10-15 years, we have managed to change the economics underpinning climate action in general, and that is definitely a very, very positive sign. The IEA, the International Energy Agency's latest data on investments into clean energy and clean technologies show that for every €2 spent, for every euro spent on fossil, it's €2 on clean. So around 2 trillion into clean energy and around 1 trillion into fossil. And a lot of the fossil investments are actually not for new fossil, but for maintaining existing explorations. So globally, we are on a good path, but clearly the distribution of the investments is not equal. So the vast majority of those investments go to the OECD and China, and we have we set a target in the global stocktake in Dubai in 2023 of tripling investments into renewable energy. And on the aggregate level, we are on track to meet that target for 2030, but it is not benefiting the vast majority of countries in the global south. So while we are, in a way, on the aggregate level meeting our targets, we now also need to make sure that they are equally spread and that the recipients, that there's an equitable spread of the recipients. Similarly, we had a target set at COP28 on transitioning away from fossil fuels. Highly controversial, but one that, for example, the European Union is now trying to accelerate its pathway towards. Brazil last year put forward a proposal for putting forward roadmaps for transition away from fossil fuels, and they will deliver a report in Antalya on this. Not all parties to the Paris Agreement agreed on this, but half or so did, and many are working on this. So I think everybody is trying their best to deliver on these pledges. Maybe just one word about the global stocktake. In the Paris Agreement, we all have pledged to deliver NDCs to the highest of our ability. And one of the reasons why the NDCs accumulated do not lead us to the 1.5 degree track. You mentioned, Professor, that we are maybe headed towards 3 degrees. Others would say 2.5, but we are not on a 1.5 degree track. And that's because not all parties yet have taken the science and have crafted NDCs and pathways that follow the science. Many are making pledges where they would rather under-promise and over-deliver, because most countries actually over-deliver. And if you take energy pathways, many countries put forward pledges that are quite soft and weak. Then they have national energy plans that are stronger with higher targets than what they have given to the UN. But then when you look at the investments, actually investments even are bigger than what they have in their national energy plans. So we are living in sort of a split reality of UN pledges, energy planning, and then the real world, real economy investment. And if you go by the real investments, things are actually going a bit faster than they are in the NDCs. And communicative-wise, and in terms of also looking at the financing, that often makes it difficult for the global public to understand what's going on, because it's multidimensional the way this is being accounted for.
Excellent. Thank you, Ambassador. That was very informative. I learned a lot, to be honest. Thank you. And I would like to continue with Rose. And Rose, although the primary accountability around climate action should be towards youth and the civil society, do you think COPs necessarily reflect that? And is there a justifiable criticism that youth and civil society engagement at COPs are cordoned off into the public green zones without adequate access for them to the official negotiations ongoing in the blue zones? I mean, you mentioned that, okay, more and more there is accreditation into negotiations by academia, etc. But what do you think, if there are concrete mechanisms that can be developed to give these groups more say into actual decision-making process, or it's already, is it good enough? What do you think?
I think, again, this goes back to something that Joanna was talking about, is understanding where those opportunities for actual decision-making process lie. I think one of the challenges of COP is that it's become a thing. It's grown into this exclusive party that it's very hard to get into. You have to have back to the observer passes, the observer status. It's very hard to get access to. One of the things that in my role at COP28 as the head of climate education, that was a huge success at the time, and we were very excited about it, was we were able to get all of the UAE universities, all of the national universities, 20 additional badges per day, and that was a huge accomplishment. And that's just a drop in the bucket. That's 20 badges per day for one nation's universities. That's not true access, but at the time that was an accomplishment. And so I think that there are a couple of realities that we'll never get past. There's a limited number of badges that they're ever going to give, and it's expensive. It's hard to get to a COP. It is not an accessible event that everybody can get to. Very few people can self-fund the travel and to get there, and in addition to the lodging and all of those kinds of things. So I think that we need to really rethink engagement at some level. I do think that civil society organizations, youth, academia need to be at the COPs, but that should not be the only location where they're engaging. I think we need to develop influence at our local and national level, going back again to what Joanna said, to work to get access to the national negotiations teams, to familiarize themselves with what is happening, what is working at a local and national level. They should look at their national reports, look at their nationally determined contributions, look at their biennial transparency reports, look at the national stock takes, and look at and see how they can get engaged in those processes. This is the information that feeds up into COP and into the UNFCCC process. So there are also research opportunities and research information. There are numerous ways to get evidence-based information to feed into this process. As I mentioned, again, the IPCC, the RSO, the constitutional bodies, but also, again, this is happening at the national and local level. The data being collected and utilized is your local data, is your national data that is feeding into these processes. So it's really important to understand what is happening, to get involved. And as Joanna said, decisions are made by the time that the COP is happening. They're there to negotiate their decisions that they've made and to have a stance on those. Where the decisions are made are back in your country when you are when they're developing those, they're getting input. One of the things that's really exciting about the UNFCCC process is that there's a lot of opportunity to give input, but you have to know when and you have to know how to do it. So really understanding those processes and thinking about how you can get engaged and put that information in there is so very important. I think we need to think of COP as kind of, I mean, to use an analogy for today, it's the World Cup. The teams are already decided. Decisions are already made. It's you got to get past your local games. You got to get past your national games to make it to the World Cup. So really playing at that local level and at that national level, I think, is where where your voice can really be heard and you can really make an impact in what's happening and where it is. And that's where the decisions are being made. And I think that that's where we should really be putting some focus. I'm not saying that people shouldn't try to go to COPs because they are a wonderful experience, but it's not the only place that you can have your voice heard.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. And Ambassador Christensen, I will go back to you. I will speed up a little bit. As we are all well aware, transatlantic and global partnerships are currently under significant geopolitical strain, and with ramifications for global climate action as well. So when major global powers change their climate policies in a negative way, what can other countries or middle powers and blocs do to keep international climate agreements on track? I know this is not an easy question, but I wanted to ask this.
Well, Professor, I also see in the chat that there are people who are asking about the geopolitics of this, and I would say the COP is remarkably well insulated against geopolitical shocks. It might be one of the few remaining areas where the logic of collective action by the world is stronger, where the centrifugal forces are stronger than what pulls us apart in the spirit of the UN Charter. And we saw that in Dubai in 2023, which took place well after the war in Gaza had started and the war in Ukraine. And we feared going into Dubai that this would make it impossible to finish the global stocktake, which is the last time we've really had a big negotiation on the energy and mitigation targets. But in Dubai, everybody came together in the end and supported the Emirati presidency in setting forward a very ambitious agenda on energy transition, forest preservation, and so on. And I think with a presidency such as the Turkish with Australia, we have an excellent host and a leader of negotiations who will be able to manage the geopolitics. Now, of course, your question is about the United States that has left the negotiations and is outside the framework. But I think this is a situation where only one country has left and everybody else has decided to stay and to work together on keeping the COP and the climate regime on track. If you look at global trade and all the complications we've had over the last year and a half, if you ask the WTO, you will get the answer that still more than 75% of all global trade follow WTO rules. So it's not that we have destroyed the WTO just because there's one country that tries to do other things. And it is like that in many different ways. We are still putting forward our climate plans. Almost everybody has now delivered their NDCs. I think all G20 countries have delivered their NDCs except for Argentina. The US did it under the Biden administration, but still, these G20 NDCs are not perfect. They don't take us far enough in terms of emissions reductions, but they are a good point of departure. And even China, India, Saudi Arabia have delivered NDCs where they make progress. Is it enough? No. Could we do more? Yes, we all could. But that's why we get together and look at what could be done to stay on course. And now we need to dig deeper into sharing lessons on transition away from fossil fuels, transitioning not only energy, but also industry, transportation, buildings. We need to learn from academia and science how we do that, bring innovation, young people into the discussion. And I think the interest globally of doing this together as a global community is stronger than pulling it apart. Everybody sees the impact of climate change at home. No country is outside the impact of what's happening. And I think policymakers around the world see the need to be part of this process, no matter what political observation they have.
Thanks a lot. Great answer, really. And yeah, so Rose, I will come back to you. So my penultimate question. As we all witness, a big issue with COPs is that when the 2-week meeting ends, in a way, the excitement slows down. So one of the challenges is that, especially for COP presidencies, is ensuring continuity. So based on your experience and building on partnership legacies, what structural frameworks do you think can ensure this momentum and the networks established during a 2-week summit can remain active and effective?
Sorry. So I think that there are a number of opportunities there. Many of the connections that are made at, or many connections from COP are obviously already established before COP. So what you're actually doing is you're strengthening those connections. So I think that this goes back to what I was saying earlier and what others have been saying about you need to really work year round to build that, to build those connections and to understand where you can fit in and how you can engage in and do things in different ways. And you can follow I really highly suggest there was a question in the chat about how would you how would you guide students to get involved if they wanted to get involved in this? And I think you need to really do your homework and understand what is happening in your country, follow what your Ministry of Education or your Ministry of Climate is doing, or follow what your Ministry of Education is doing for climate education, figure out what is happening, join YoungGo, participate in your Climate Action Network. There's a number of different organizations that can really help you build those opportunities and doing that. So I think one of the things in doing some of that research is understanding what some of the admitted parties are. So who they are, and to build relevant relationships with those entities. I think another area where you can really work is understanding where the who is engaged and who's participating at different levels at COP. So understanding who's giving, where you can put in submissions, where information is being sought, and who is putting in submissions and what they're saying, and then follow those organizations that are moving in the direction that you want to be seen. So building those relationships and to be proactive in laying that foundation so that you can then have some clarity in those 2 weeks. And then in those 2 weeks, you strengthen those relationships, but then they continue post. So I don't think that anyone should approach a COP saying that I've got 2 weeks to get all of this done. There's a lot of work to be done before, and then you have to continue it afterwards. So that's really a process in a much bigger picture.
Thanks a lot, Rose. And Joanna, my final question in this round is to you. You have extensively written about the risks of institutional ossification within UNFCCC or institutional rigidity in climate governance. So considering the shift from Kyoto with its legally binding targets to more voluntary Paris pledges for all. What do you think about this new flexibility? You have explained this a little bit, but has it just moved the bottlenecks from negotiations floors to domestic implementation, or what structural reforms are needed to ensure that UNFCCC and COPs remain dynamic and effective rather than performative? I know you have partially answered this, but I would like to ask this last question in this round, and then I will actually switch to the common question. Please.
Yes, thank you for that. I mean, that's an extremely pertinent question. I think there are concerns about the process that are coming to the fore. With regard to the substance and the structure of the regime, I think there was a lot of hope vested in the Paris Agreement, in the non-legally binding, in the voluntary, universal approach. I think there were very high expectations that would trigger a kind of virtuous cycle. The governments would really get on board with this 5-yearly ratcheting up of the NDCs. And to some extent that has happened. I think Ambassador Christensen is absolutely right that has happened. I think it's a bit unfortunate. There's been a bit of let's say dropping off of enthusiasm with NDC 3. I mean, NDC 2, you kind of really felt the Paris Agreement was working. NDC 3, slightly less. I mean, they are coming in, but they're a lot later. They're kind of trickling in rather than the flood there was NDC 1 and NDC 2, and they're maybe not quite as strengthened as we thought. So, yes, so I think Paris is working, but I think there is growing anxiety about whether it can really trigger the kind of transformation at pace that we need. And I think maybe what it shows is that it's not really enough to just change structure, from Kyoto to Paris. There are actually deeper seated issues in terms of the forces that are obstructing progress. I mentioned the vested interest, the fossil fuel lobby, and whatever the structure of the international regime is, that doesn't necessarily stop those from exerting a lot of influence over national governments. I do, despite the positivity that I have, I do worry a little bit that the negotiations are becoming more performative, and I like that word that you've used. Personally, I've written in places I'm worried about them becoming like a talk shop. I mean, we have so many work streams on so many different issues, all of them extremely important: agriculture, oceans, forestry, gender, indigenous peoples, all these and many, many more. But somehow they all seem to consist almost exclusively of workshops, of roundtables, of high-level discussions. And I'm just a bit worried if the implementation phase of the climate regimes becomes just talking about things. I'm a bit concerned about that. So I would just very quickly like to touch on reform, because I know that many people are very interested about this. I think there's, and I think this is very much a hot topic. I think it's coming to a head with the really mega COPs that we've seen. I think they are being seen as inefficient and unwieldy. And then there's the question of decision making, because the past 3 COPs we've had some, let's say, very messy decision-making process where certain delegations have been very unhappy with what they see as their voice having been silenced, as decisions have been taken in a non-consensual way. And that brings in the question of voting, because as we know, all decisions are taken by consensus. Well, not all of them, but almost all of them have to be taken by consensus in the climate negotiations. And some, including me occasionally, have said that we should try once again to introduce voting. Now, again, that would be a subject of a webinar in itself, because it would be a really major step that would be extremely, extremely difficult. I think there are ways to do it, so we should not abandon that prospect. I won't go into it. I think it would really help in terms of messaging, especially on the science, because, by the way, something that I'm worried about at the moment is the way in which there seems to be regression in attacking the science, specifically in the agenda item that Rose mentioned on research, which is usually a very quiet item, but now some countries are using that to really try and downplay the importance of the IPCC and other things. I think with a voting rule, that could be stopped, because the vast majority of countries are very worried about the science. So voting is there as a potential option if there were leaders that wanted to see it through, but it's not a panacea. So, for example, on fossil fuel phase out, I think even if we had a voting rule, I'm not sure that countries would vote for strengthened decarbonisation or strengthened fossil fuel roadmap. So voting would be a good idea for a number of reasons, but it would not solve our problems. It would not do away with the obstacles that are preventing faster action than we would like. And I could talk about this for a long time, but
yeah.
right now.
I mean, it's extremely interesting and informative, and I'm really enjoying it. But unfortunately, we need to move on. And my last common question, then I will ask each of you one question from the audience. But my last common question, I can continue with you, Joanna. So from your own perspective and expertise, if the upcoming COP31 in Turkey is to be remembered with one single achievement, what should it be from your point of view? And
Yes,
this
thank you.
question
I
is for
actually
everyone.
yeah, thank you. I actually wrote down 4, but I'll condense that to 2. The first one, I think the mooted electrification target, 35% by 2035, whether that's done in a coalition of the willing or in the COP, I think that's very interesting. But from a process point of view, Antalya needs to uphold climate multilateralism. Yeah, make sure nobody else defects from the Paris Agreement, strong messaging that everyone supports it. Have a successful partnership with Australia, because that would be great. It would set a precedent for this kind of, two-party presidency, which I think is so promising. And it'd be good to have a smooth decision-making process at the end. As I say, 3 COPs in a row with very unsatisfactory decision-making. It would be great if the 2 presidencies could work together to make sure everyone feels included and everything is adopted smoothly by consensus to really uphold that legitimacy and credibility of the negotiations.
Okay, thank you. Rose, what would you say?
Well, the 35 by 35 was definitely one of mine. I did appreciate at Bonn how the COP31 presidency said COP31 is not about making new decisions. It's about implementing the decisions already made. So I really appreciate that. And I would really appreciate I like the continuation of the action agenda from COP30. It allows some continuity, and again, not reinventing the wheel each time we're doing this with a whole new action agenda. So I really appreciate that and like that's moving forward.
Mr. Ambassador, what would you say about this one single achievement? What should it be?
Since we launched with Turkey and Australia in London last week, the Electrify Now initiative, which is sort of building the alliance to drive electrification at COP, I would of course join them on the electrification. Whether the time is ripe for having the target adopted formally, I'm not sure. I think the next global stocktake that will be at COP33 is where we should review all the energy targets. And I think many parties in the global south would not be very happy at having new targets adopted sort of without being in the context of the others. That being said, I think COP31 should also launch the process towards the next global stocktake in a way, where we would have to review renewable energy efficiency, methane, all the central components of the energy mitigation package. And that also includes the roadmap for transition away from fossil fuels and the roadmap on forests, where the Brazilian presidency will deliver reports to the Turkish presidency and to the Australians, and it will be up to you what you do with them. So I think there's an important task in landing those reports in a way that doesn't split the parties, but in a way brings them together. And then one final thing. For many parties, this is also a Pacific COP. All those who wanted Australia as the host, and we will have the pre-COP in Fiji with a leaders segment in Tuvalu. So having an element that signals to the most vulnerable that this is also a place where they can recognize themselves, where resilience is at the core, is important.
Thanks a lot. Thank you. And I'm trying to check all the questions by the audience, so I will continue with you, Mr. Ambassador. So this is my last question to you. And so if the country, I mean, in the negotiations, I mean, we have talked that countries position themselves before the event. So do we often see that these positions change through the negotiations? And if it does in a positive way, what do you think the main reason or motivation behind it? What motivates them to change their positions during the negotiation? Or is it seen? Is it often witnessed?
Thank you, Prof, for that question. And in a way, this is where I differ from Joanna, because the fact that we adopt by consensus the outcome also means that countries have to change their position, because often the outcomes, that's where the decision process that Joanna refers to, the unhappiness by many parties with the outcome comes into play. And it's a double-edged sword. I do recognize that often decisions then cross the red lines of some parties. On the other hand, the fact that the consensus still stands and countries feel committed by it and are angry about being committed by something they don't fully feel they own, well, that is also how the process is taken forward. And just to give you a few examples, coming into COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh, the European Union did not support having a loss and damage fund. But in the end, to join consensus, they did so. In COP26 in Glasgow, China and India did not support having a phase out or phase down of coal in the final agreement. But in the end, to join consensus, they accepted that. At COP28, OPEC countries, led by Saudi Arabia, did not accept that we should be transitioning away from fossil fuels. But in the end, it was in the final outcome, and they accepted the outcome. Last year in Belém, the European Union was against a pledge of tripling adaptation finance, but in the end they accepted that push to join the consensus and be part of it. So yes, you actually do see major countries changing their position in the course of the negotiations to join the consensus, because they think it is in their common interest and in the interest of the regime and the process to join consensus rather than to split it and having been a failure. And I think in that sense, the experience from the COP that my home country, Denmark, hosted in 2009, COP15, where consensus was not achieved and the Copenhagen Accord was not really adopted, and where the Mexican presidency at COP16 the year after had to formally adopt many of the things that were informally agreed but not formally adopted, stands really for most countries as an experience they don't want to repeat, and therefore they do accept consensus. And Joanna, if we didn't have consensus and we had split decisions on everything, nobody would feel committed to actually doing what is set out. So as complicated consensus is, we're better off with it than without it.
Sorry, can I just respond to that? I mean, I don't want you to get me wrong. I mean, I think consensus is definitely the way we should go. I just look at the advantages and disadvantages of having them, but certainly in my considered view, there would be a lot of disadvantages in moving to a voting system, and it would have to be very carefully crafted just for some types of decisions or things like that. Anyway, we can talk about this offline, but please don't think that we're in disagreement, because I think we actually violently agree, to be honest.
Thanks, Joanna. Actually, there's another question which I would like to direct to you. So fossil fuels are always the biggest controversy at these summits, which we may all agree, I guess. And do you think COP31 will create a change or a consensus to move away from fossil fuels? Does it have that potential?
No, I don't. No, I don't. I mean, I think now is not really the time, to be honest, to push on this. I agree with Ambassador Christensen that, well, what you implied is that we're unlikely to move forward just because of the geopolitical economic situation. Yes, I suspect the US will not really participate, even though it probably still is a party to the convention. Yeah, but I think it won't really participate. But I think it's not really something to push right now. You know, as you said, I think it is something that we can look at going forwards. It'd be good to get the fossil fuel roadmap report presented and to somehow inject it so that it's in the conversation going forwards. I think even getting an agreement that the global stocktake will consider the fossil fuel roadmap, I mean, that might be a bit tricky. In a sense, that's why I quite like the pivot towards electrification, because in a sense that's something a little bit more positive. It's like doing something as opposed to stopping something, and a lot of countries are not far from meeting that target anyway. That's why I was quite taken with that idea. I mean, I agree that having it as part of an actual COP decision is just not necessarily going to happen at all. But if there were a declaration, I know we're increasingly having these declarations, but if there was such a declaration of coalition of the willing, this could then feed into the next process for the GST, the second global stocktake. So the answer is no, but if some kind of progress could be made to just keep it there, to just keep it simmering there, I think that would in itself be beneficial. But we don't want to have a huge bust up, as they say in England, at the COP. Yeah, we really want it to keep its legitimacy, its credibility, its authority, and to demonstrate global, commitment to cooperation, not global division.
Thanks a lot. And and the last question, there are many interesting questions, but I needed to pick. And Rose, this is to you. It's one of the audience is questioning the role of universities, especially now that we are discussing that this COP31 will be a COP of implementation and starting to apply the commitments. What the universities are expected to move from climate ambition to climate implementation? What can they do? How can they support? I mean, I know it's not the university's main role to implement these actions, but how can academia support this implementation process?
I think that one of the things that we need to do is make sure that we're training our students, the next generation, to have the correct skills. I think that this is a real challenge in higher education right now. Things are moving very fast, and the process of getting curriculum approved and into place is a long process. It can often take 5-6 more years to do that. And if you think 5-6 years back, what was the solar industry? What was these things happening? So it's moving much faster than that. So we need to be much more nimble and much faster in training and getting a group of the next generation of students ready for what they're going to be facing. And I think AI is just exacerbating this at the speed of what's happening. So I think we need to, as I said, be more nimble, and we need to start doing much more hands-on learning, because the curriculum, because you can't change some things, there are ways to integrate this in, and through research projects and through more hands-on work and integrating it into the existing curriculum to make sure that they're getting that is super, super important. And I think that experiential learning is in today's day and age is essential to prepare people for what they're going to be facing out there. Many of our professors, the world that they're teaching students to be a part of is a world that they don't fully, that they haven't fully engaged with, because it is happening so rapidly. So I think we really need to look at that curriculum speed and the curriculum process, and making sure that we're prepared for it.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. And with this, I think I will end the panel, but I really, really appreciate your input, Joanna, Rose, Mr. Ambassador. This was really amazing, your input. And this panel will be broadcasted on YouTube as well, and I'm sure it will draw a lot of interest. And we will also, in our social media, give place to this. And this was one of the most informative webinars that I joined, and I had the pleasure now of moderating. I learned tons. So again, many thanks to our panelists, and many thanks to the audience who was here with us. So thanks a lot, and hopefully we will see you also in Antalya.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was a great event. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Pleasure is ours. Thank you.